Well, turning now to the JonBenet Ramsey investigation. Former Boulder police detective Steve Thomas is trying to shed light on the JonBenet Ramsey murder investigation in his new book. NBC's Dan Abrams takes a look at Thomas's theory and the Ramsey case.
Thomas resigned in August 1998 to protest what he called the Boulder DA's mishandling of the case. And while this is the first time he's gone public with specifics of his theory, bedwetting as a possible motive is nothing new. The Ramseys addressed it when they spoke with Katie last month.
Another scenario, Patsy, that you flew into a rage over JonBenet's bedwetting.
There again, you know, what are your priorities? JonBenet would have an occasional accident. It was nothing to be alarmed at. I didn't care one way or the other. I would not have ever. It's just ludicrous. You can't even answer it.
As for the ransom note, Thomas says everyone whose handwriting was tested was excluded, except Patsy Ramsey. Not so, say the Ramseys.
There are lots of pieces of handwriting that we have of other suspects that match much more closely than mine does.
We had the note looked at by national experts in handwriting, and they told us the same thing. They said it's a very low probability of comparison that Patsy's writing compares. Very low probability that she would have been the writer.
Thomas also discloses surprising details about the investigation, such as the fact that Boulder detectives broke into the cemetery where JonBenet is buried and planted a hidden microphone and camera a few feet from JonBenet's grave, hoping they might overhear a graveside confession. All they got were some curious sightseers and a salesman who sold a burial plot to an elderly couple. These sort of disclosures and opinions aren't sitting well with many in Boulder. Alex Hunter, the district attorney who calls Thomas a tormented soul, urged caution with regard to Thomas's conclusions.
He didn't have the background and the sort of the depth of understanding that several of the other detectives did. I don't think detectives ought to be writing books.
That was NBC's Dan Abrams reporting. Well, coming up, we will have a live interview with the detective who was at the center of the JonBenet Ramsey case. He will tell us what he thinks happened in the Ramseys' Boulder home that fateful night and who he thinks killed JonBenet. We will be talking with Steve Thomas after the break. Don't go away.
This MSNBC Business Final is...
Because you went with your daughter on the weekends to a talent show, does that translate to make us murderers? I mean, come on. I don't think so.
That was Patsy Ramsey talking with the Today Show's Katie Couric last month. Well, a former lead detective in the JonBenet Ramsey murder investigation says he thinks Patsy Ramsey killed her daughter. Steve Thomas outlines his theory in the new book, JonBenet Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation, and he joins us now from New York. Hello and welcome to you, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, let me start with this. This is an ongoing investigation. It is still very much an open case. Was it appropriate for you to write this book now, and why?
Well, that's quite a fallacy that the district attorney is trying to continue to put upon the American public, that this is an ongoing active case. As a matter of fact, I would refer him just Friday. One of his top advisors in this case has acknowledged what many have known for a long time, that this is a cold case, that absent a confession on the part of a remorseful killer, this case is going absolutely nowhere.
Well, what about the charges that this is unethical for you to write this book right now?
Well, I would say that my tolerance finally ran out for the doublespeak and the hypocrisy inside government, and particularly inside the district attorney's office and the district attorney himself, who was not only shoveling case file information to the primary suspects in this case, but to the media as well. And this was government at its absolute worst. And finally, my tolerance was exhausted, and I urge you, read this book, and then you tell me that this was not a story that should have been told.
Specifically, what did Boulder police do wrong in the initial hours of this investigation?
Well, even the Boulder Police Department now concedes that on the 26th of December, in what everybody now can see is a patently bogus ransom note, it was treated as a kidnapping, and a crime scene was not secured. Witnesses and potential suspects were not separated and interviewed, And there were just a number of things that are Police Academy 101. And then beyond that, mistakes continued to be made, and then the DA's office got involved in the fray, and it went downhill from there.
You believe Patsy Ramsey killed her daughter. What is the strongest evidence that supports that?
Well, the detective certainly wished that this case would have been a smoking gun case or a definitive DNA case or a bloody fingerprint, but it wasn't. And over the course of a couple of years, in what became a 30,000-plus page case file, it was a circumstantial case, and I think a compelling circumstantial case. And if one steps back and takes a macro perspective of this case, I think this is not just me talking. The detectives involved in this case, ultimately the grand jury prosecutors, other law enforcement, were all in consensus that the right person and the right people were being targeted in this case, and in particular Patsy Ramsey. But as to your question, what evidence, there's a lot of evidence, but the strongest being the pen, the pad, the ransom note, and the handwriting.
And in fact, let's take a look at part of the ransom notes so that you can explain a bit more what you're talking about. We've highlighted the A's. What is so significant about these A's, these lowercase A's?
Well, taken by themselves, certainly an argument could be made either way, but what we found significant was that pre-homicide, Patsy Ramsey was inclined to make what we call these lowercase manuscript A's throughout her writing. And we noted that in the ransom note, this lowercase manuscript A was prevalent throughout, but post-homicide, after the Ramseys were wrongly given a copy of this ransom note, her use of that lowercase manuscript A dropped off the map, and she discontinued writing like that.
There's also something you point to in the way that this ransom letter was signed. Let's take a look at that. It was signed Victory SBTC. Now, what did you make of that?
Well, we never had been able to determine what the acronym SBTC stands for, although there had been many suggestions, one good one concerning something found in the open family Bible in the house that night, in which some letters corresponded. But what was interesting was the sign-off there, it's up to you now, John, exclamation point, victory, exclamation point, indented, and then an indented SBTC. And we found numerous examples of Patsy Ramsey's pre-homicide handwriting in which we made transparencies, and you could almost lay them over onto the ransom note, and some found it quite chilling.
Well, even if Patsy Ramsey did write the note, is that enough to prove that she killed her daughter?
Well, I make the argument what happened in Boulder, Colorado was a sense that where did logic and common sense seem to go? I don't think it's that great a leap, absent some big conspiracy, that the writer of the note is involved in the killing of the child.
Steve Thomas, I want to ask you to stick around. We're going to take a short break and continue our conversation with you. Steve Thomas will be back right after this. Don't go away.
America's worst prison riot.
Prisoners told us they would kill everyone.
Inmates take hostages and make demands.
We're talking about changing conditions inside the prisons.
So what happens when requests are ignored and communications break down? From the standoff to the aftermath, hear what really happened in the deadly rebellion of Attica. Crime Files. Tonight at 8 on MSNBC. Violent tornadoes, surprise snowstorms. What's causing the wild extremes in the nation's weather? On the news with Brian Williams tonight at 9 on MSNBC.
Williams?
Walters.
Right. Now we're having back pain?
Actually, it's my throat.
Right. No allergies, though.
Penicillin.
That would have been bad. Do you know your blood type?
No.
Well, it probably won't come up. Wait in there.
Hi. Ever get the feeling some people just stop trying? At Avis, we know that people like to be taken care of.
With the car seat.
Right.
Individually.
See near, see far, without glasses. Discover the revolutionary AccuView bifocal contact lens, the first with pupil-intelligent design. See near, see far, the way nature intended. The AccuView bifocal contact lens. Call us for a free trial pair certificate or visit your eye care professional.
It takes
takes a big man to take on Lennox Lewis, the heavyweight champion of the world. In fact, it takes a bigger man. A man so big, he can only be the undefeated challenger, Michael Grant. And this town's not big enough for both of them. Lewis versus Grant, April 29th, live on Direct Ticket. Lennox Lewis versus Michael Grant, live on Direct Ticket pay-per-view on Channel 101. Can Grant cut Lewis down to size?
Mr. David Allen Stewart.
Miss Annie Lennox.
Eurythmics reunite for an exciting evening, and it's free to DirecTV customers. See them perform their hits from the 80s. And songs from their first new album since 1989. Don't miss this DirecTV Freeview event. Eurythmics in concert, every weekend this month on Channel 103.
Make a connection with MSNBC. Send us your comments now.
We are continuing our conversation with Steve Thomas, a former lead detective on the JonBenet Ramsey murder investigation. Mr. Thomas has written a new book about this case. And if you would, Steve, please walk us through what you think happened on that night in December of 1996.
Well, in this case, the question I get all the time is from people, what do I think happened? And I offer a hypothesis in the book, 2 pages out of a 360-some-odd page book, as to one of the possible scenarios that I thought may have occurred. Certainly the detectives discussed a number of scenarios, but I think mine was consistent with the evidence as I knew it and took a relatively simple explanation to explain Patsy Ramsey's involvement. And it's quite simple, really. I think there was some sort of explosive encounter late that night between mother and daughter, which resulted in the child being killed. And thus, by definition, an accidental death lacks motive. And then I think where the motive came in was in a cover-up that followed.
Now, you also talk about bedwetting perhaps being a problem that may have led Patsy Ramsey to eventually kill her daughter. Tell me about that.
Well, again, let's put it in context. I saw the Ramseys a moment ago, Patsy remarking how infrequent and what a small thing it was, but at least one of the witnesses that we spoke with said not only was it a problem, but it was a problem that had become habitual and nightly in the weeks and months prior to her death. And this isn't just me talking. Again, in this case, we consulted with highly esteemed pediatric experts who told me that one of the #1 reasons that they saw in cases where parents killed children was a parental rage whose genesis was in a bedwetting or toileting accident.
What's your take on John Ramsey? Do you think he really knows what happened?
Well, and again, I'm speculating here, but only he knows. And of course, he's vehemently denied any knowledge or participation. But again, I think the Ramseys know more than they have told authorities about what went on in the house that night.
Ramsey attorney Lynn Wood has said that your theory is, quote, fiction, and that he plans on taking legal action against you. Are you prepared for that?
Well, what I find remarkable is what I think is the hypocrisy. They took advantage of every constitutional right this country affords them throughout the legal process. And then their First Amendment right a month ago, they exercised and penned a book and named 3 people as the possible killer of their daughter. 3 people whom I believe are clearly innocent people, yet when I try to exercise that same First Amendment right, they point the cannons at me, and I have to challenge that.
If everything you say is true, why hasn't there been an indictment?
Probable cause was never the issue in this case. As a matter of fact, for 13 years as a police officer and a detective, I had never been involved in a case that I can remember in which we did not arrest on probable cause. But due to this case being legally manipulated to death, and all the politics and egos and behind the scenes that was going on, not only was an arrest not made, but the grand jury, who presumably saw that same probable cause that the police had early, through whatever process, it was determined that there was not enough there was not enough to take it to a criminal trial where beyond a reasonable doubt is the threshold.
Final question, on a personal note, do you miss being a detective, and would you ever do it again?
I miss the hell out of police work. Cops are the greatest people on earth. I love cops. But Boulder, Colorado has a seriously flawed criminal justice system. I don't miss being a cop in Colorado. I miss being a cop, but I work as a carpenter now, and that's good, honest work for me now.
Actually, I lied. I've got one more quick question. Do you think there will ever be an indictment in this case?
No, absolutely not. And again, the district attorney is misleading people if he suggests otherwise. Absent a confession in this case, absent a remorseful killer confessing, nobody's going to be charged in this case, and Alex Hunter knows that.
The book is JonBenet, Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation. Steve Thomas, thanks very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you.
When we come back, we will have a recap of the day's top stories, including the latest on Wall Street. Stay with us.